It's 5 p.m. across India. I am Tanvi Taneja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global, bringing you all the day's big stories from across India and the world. With me today from London is my colleague, Ollie Barrett. Good to see you, Ollie.
Hello Tanvi, it's 11:30 a.m. here in the UK, 12:30 p.m. across Central Europe, coming up in the next 30 minutes. G7 foreign ministers don't call for a ceasefire in the Middle East. 2023 temperatures do head for a record, and why that means a long face for horseback fishers in Belgium. First, the headlines.
G7 presents a unified stance after Tokyo meet. Members agree to support a humanitarian pause in the Israel-Gaza conflict.
We all agreed that humanitarian pauses would advance key objectives: to protect Palestinian civilians, to increase the sustained flow of humanitarian assistance, to allow our citizens and foreign nationals to exit, and to facilitate the release of hostages.
Israel continues to target Gaza tunnel network on 33rd day of the conflict. Tensions run high along the Israel-Lebanon border as Netanyahu warns against Hezbollah escalation. Abortion rights advocates and Democrats score wins in US elections, an early signal that reproductive rights remain a potent issue ahead of the 2024 presidential race. And Paris hosts a global summit to discuss rapid deterioration of poles and glaciers. Israeli military has claimed that its airstrikes over the Gaza Strip has killed a top Hamas weapons maker, Mohsen Abu Zina, and several Hamas fighters. The military targeted the Hamas's vast tunnel network beneath the besieged Palestinian enclave. The Israeli troops have advanced to the heart of the densely populated Gaza city. Meanwhile, clashes have been reported between a group and Israeli forces near the Al-Shati refugee camp in the Gaza city. During a media briefing following the G7 meet in Tokyo, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressed a collective desire to resolve the Israel-Hamas conflict, but pointed that a ceasefire will have dire consequences if Hamas remains in power.
All of us want to end this conflict as soon as possible, and meanwhile, to minimize civilian suffering. But as I discussed with my G7 colleagues, those calling for an immediate ceasefire have an obligation to explain how to address the unacceptable result it would likely bring about. Hamas left in place with more than 200 hostages, with the capacity and stated intent to repeat October 7th again and again and again. Ultimately, the only way to ensure that this crisis never happens again is to begin setting the conditions for durable peace and security, and to frame our diplomatic efforts now with that in mind.
It's almost been a month since Hamas held hostages from Israel that resulted in the Israel-Gaza conflict. Amid the negotiations, Hamas has released only 5 hostages, and efforts are being made to bring back the rest of them. DD India's Amritpal Singh had a conversation with the friends of hostages, and he reports from Hakrea in Tel Aviv.
It's been more than a month since the horrendous attacks by Hamas took place on Israel. Hamas that day not only killed people, but took 242 of them hostages, many of them elderly, small children, people of all ages, even Israeli soldiers, and also many of them, more than half of them, according to the IDF estimates, foreign nationals. While efforts are on to get the hostages released, there are Qatar-based mediated negotiations happening, but without much success. Only 5 hostages have been released so far.
I'm scared because what we have in the school and in our home and with the people that we grew up with, it's not gonna be the same like it used to.
We are here to support the families, and we are here to tell people the stories of these people. We used to study with, we used to play with when we were kids. Her school kids from the class are now kidnapped in Gaza Strip and Gaza.
People are getting restive. There were protests outside Benjamin Netanyahu's homes, and their stories are really heart-wrenching. While they ask them to put the pressure on their government to get their loved ones back. Amritpal Singh for DD India in Hakiria, Tel Aviv.
Jamil AFL Qaid has said that India, being an emerging power, can play a crucial role in solving the West Asia conflict.
India, as an emerging power in the world now, India can play a role on that situation in order to solve the problem and to save the lives of people who are killed there.
Now on to Tokyo, where G7 foreign ministers today issued a unified message on the Israel-Hamas war. My colleague Ollie Barrett is in London. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ollie, G7 calling in one voice for a humanitarian pause in the conflict.
Thank you, Tanvi. Yes, indeed, the G7 foreign ministers who've been meeting, as you say, with a major focus on the crisis in the Middle East, on which they say they are unified, but also with other areas of focus too, including Ukraine. And one of the issues when it comes to Ukraine has been ongoing support for the country with its conflict with Russia, but also calls for dialogue as well with China. Now, Japan's Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa heralded the G7's response to the crisis in Israel and Gaza.
G7 members have agreed to unequivocally condemn the terrorist attack by Hamas and others, and secondly, to seek the immediate release of hostages. Thirdly, we have agreed that it's necessary to take urgent action to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the G7 nations agreed on the stance on calling for humanitarian pauses because it will help achieve key objectives.
G7 ministers reaffirmed our staunch support for Israel's right and obligation to defend itself and seek to ensure the attacks of October 7th can never happen again in accordance with international humanitarian law. We had in-depth discussions about the steps that we are taking to address urgent needs on the ground. We all agreed that humanitarian pauses would advance key objectives: to protect Palestinian civilians, to increase the sustained flow of humanitarian assistance, to allow our citizens and foreign nationals to exit, and to facilitate the release of hostages.
Well, we can go live now to DD India's Sarah Coates, who's standing by in Tel Aviv. Sarah, what's the latest you can tell us in terms of updates on Israel's operations inside Gaza?
Hello there, Ollie. Well, look, Israel says it has moved into the next stage of operations. The Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, he's just come out to say that Israeli forces are now deep inside the heart of Gaza City. The IDF did come out with an operational update just a little while ago. It says it killed the head weapons commander, the man responsible for firing all of these rockets into Israel. His name is Mohsen Abu Zina. So this will certainly put a dent in Hamas's capabilities. That's according to the Israel Defense Forces. Now, it also says it's focusing right now on this labyrinth of tunnels. It runs right underneath Gaza, hundreds and hundreds of these tunnels that they use to reportedly smuggle fighters and move fighters around the Gaza Strip. It does say, according to the IDF, that they're now enclosed the head of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Yahya Sinwar. And look, this is a pretty crucial moment. If the IDF actually does get Sinwar and potentially take him out or take him captive, this would certainly cause a ripple effect right around the Middle East and would potentially spark some sort of heavy reaction from Hezbollah on Israel's northern border.
Okay, Sarah, thank you. That is DD India's Sarah Coates live from Tel Aviv. Now, returning to those talks that have been going on in Japan, G7 foreign ministers meeting there, we can now go to DD India's Chris Gilbert, who joins us live from Tokyo. And Chris, just talk to us about why those G7 foreign ministers have not called for a ceasefire.
Well, you said it earlier, Ollie, that Yoko Kamikawa, the foreign minister of Japan, is heralding this as a huge accomplishment. Just getting these diplomats on the same page on Gaza, to her, it seems like a miraculous achievement. As if it was not the fifth meeting of them this year. But we did hear Antony Blinken earlier saying that there are concerns by the US, by Washington, that any ceasefire may allow Hamas, or the militant wing of Hamas, time to regroup. That has always been their position. It has not always been the position of countries like France or Japan, however, who have wanted to see a truce in the situation. So it is somewhat of a win for the US. It's a softening of positions by countries like France and Japan, and it does fall short of the democratic calls inside G7 countries by the public, these growing walks and movements calling for a ceasefire. So it's yet to be seen, of course, if a humanitarian pause eventuates, if it satiates that demand for a ceasefire, those calls for a ceasefire, and what form it will take.
Okay, Chris, and G7 foreign ministers have been keen to stress as well that they weren't just talking about the Middle East crisis in these discussions. When it comes to the Ukraine conflict, some pretty strong words directed at China.
Yeah, Volodymyr Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, a couple of weeks ago was saying that he wanted to see a reaffirmation of his Western allies and their support for Ukraine. And we did see that from the G7 foreign ministers meeting, a reaffirmation of solidarity, or as they say, unwavering solidarity for Ukraine, that their focus and their priority is very much there in the form of financial, military and humanitarian assistance. When it comes to China, you know, when we had the G7 leaders meeting in May, there was a 5-point plan about how the G7 wanted to follow or pursue conduct with their bilateral relations with China. That was somewhat diluted in some respects by the messaging in this meeting. The G7 simply saying they wanted to pursue frank, candid dialogue with China, and that may be due to the potential for bilateral leaders meetings coming up on the fringes of APEC very soon. But the strongest message was to North Korea in the Indo-Pacific realm, condemning their ongoing ballistic missile launches and also repeated concerns without any proof as of yet that North Korea is supplying weapons to Russia. And while North Korea does openly supports Russia's conflict of Ukraine, both countries are denying those claims.
Okay, Chris, thank you. That is DD India's Chris Gilbert reporting live from Tokyo. And after attending the G7 meeting in Tokyo, US Foreign Minister Antony Blinken is set to visit South Korea amid concerns over deepening military ties between Russia and North Korea. It's his first visit to Seoul since Yoon Suk-yeol became the country's president last year. DD India's Andrew Wood reports from Hong Kong.
The United States, Japan and South Korea have already condemned North Korea for supplying arms and ammunition to Russia for use in Ukraine. South Korea itself is actually quite a big producer and exporter of armaments. So far, Seoul says that it doesn't want to supply arms to countries that are at war. So this might be an area where Mr. Blinken might want to try to change the Seoul's president's, the South Korean's president's mind. Because after all, more armaments for Ukraine would probably help the country to fight back against Russia. There's also the perennial issue of North Korea. Back in August, Mr. Blinken said that if Beijing did not help to try to denuclearize North Korea, then America would have to strengthen its alliance with Japan and South Korea. And it certainly seems to be doing that. It's done that over the past month or so. There's much more cooperation between these two US allies in, well, virtually in sharing information about North Korea and also about the possible threats from China as well. So this also might be some manoeuvring as well before the big meeting next week that's expected between President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden in San Francisco on the sidelines of the APEC Forum for Pacific Rim countries in San Francisco. In Hong Kong, I'm Andrew Wood, reporting for DD India.
In the United States, voters have chosen governors in Kentucky and Mississippi. Democratic Governor Andy Beshear, who wants to expand healthcare access, has won re-election in Kentucky. In Mississippi, Republican Governor Tate Reeves has won his bid for re-election too against Democrat Brandon Presley. In Virginia, Democrats won control of both legislative chambers. In Ohio, voters approved a constitutional amendment guaranteeing abortion rights, which means the state's proposed ban on abortions after about 6 weeks cannot go into effect. 2023 is set to be the warmest year on record due to unprecedented temperature irregularities, according to scientists. This comes after October 2023 was identified as the warmest October globally, with an average surface temperature of 15.3 degrees Celsius. Scientists say the Earth has not witnessed such high temperatures in more than 100,000 years. The warning comes ahead of the COP28 Global Climate Summit in Dubai.
Is climate change driven, and when we look at the data, we can say that the extra heat in the Earth system comes from a range of different locations. So if we look at different latitudinal bands of the planet, then we can say that there's, in October, extra heat coming from the Northern Hemisphere land.
Traditional horseback fishers in Belgium say they've noticed changes in the North Sea because of climate change. The shift has disrupted fishing seasons and could lead to an extinction of certain species.
Traditional horseback fishers on Belgium's far western coast are witnessing the impact of climate change on the North Sea's ecosystem. With reduced shrimp catches and an influx of weaver fish and squid, an ecosystem shift is evident.
We have less shrimp catch than we used to, but we also have more weavers and animal species that you didn't see here before, which come from the Atlantic as the water warms up.
The rise in sea temperatures has disrupted the fishing community's traditional seasons, attributing it to climate change.
The best period to fish for shrimps used to be from September until December, when it starts to freeze. What we see now is that we get the best catches later in the season. I guess that there is a link with the climate change, because the water and the temperatures we live in have warmed up.
The North Sea has experienced a notable 0.3 degrees Celsius temperature increase every decade since 1991. Scientists warn that this warming has caused some species such as weavers and squid to increase in abundance, while others like North cod have declined.
For me, this is quite alarming, because at this rate, we see that a lot of species cannot cope and either migrate or go extinct. And if species go extinct, our food web will be impacted, which has consequences for us.
Concerns arise about the ecosystem's fragility and potential species extinction due to these changes. This situation could significantly impact the region's food web.
And that's all I've got for you today. Back to you in the studio, Tanvi.
Thank you, Ollie. Ollie Barrett joining us from London. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. Fifth India-US 2+2 ministerial dialogue to be held in New Delhi from tomorrow. And a Switzerland-designed implant has revolutionized the treatment of Parkinson's disease. Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh and Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar will host US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defence Lloyd Austin for the 5th India-US 2+2 ministerial dialogue in New Delhi on 10th of November. This dialogue will facilitate a high-level review of progress in various aspects of defence and security cooperation. During the discussions, the ministers will work on advancing the future roadmap for the India-US partnership. The meeting will also address regional matters and emphasise shared priorities for expanding collaborations. The Indian ministers will hold separate meetings with their US counterparts, underscoring the continuity of ministerial dialogue and reaffirming India-US ties. World leaders and heads of international organizations are gathering in the French capital this week for the 6th edition of the Paris Peace Forum. It comes against a challenging backdrop of geopolitical tensions, which make collective action all the more urgent. In the run-up to the main dialogue, which begins on Friday, the first World Summit on glaciers and poles is currently being held. Now, in a major boost to global collaboration in education, 2 leading Australian universities announced that they will be opening their campuses in Gift City in India's western state of Gujarat. We have a report.
Located on the banks of Sabarmati River in western India, the Gift City or Gujarat International Finance Tech City is emerging as finance and technology hub of national and global importance. In the latest development, the city created history after 2 prestigious Australian universities, Deakin and Wollongong, announced that they will be opening their campuses in Gift City. The announcement was made in the presence of Indian Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan and his Australian counterpart Jason Clare in Gift City.
Our 21st century is going to be the knowledge-based society. It should be a knowledge-based economy. So this kind of bridge between both the countries, between both the democracies, will certainly create a new ecosystem of knowledge and service-based economy.
This is a historic day. These are the first 2 international universities to be given approval to establish a campus in India, Wollongong University and Deakin University, and I hope that they are the first of a number. But the truth is that our relationship is long and strong. Australian universities and Indian universities have been working together for many decades.
During Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Gift City in 2022, the city's regulatory body, International Financial Services Authority, signed memorandums with regulatory authorities of Singapore, Luxembourg, Qatar and Sweden. The achievements have enhanced the city's standing. Earlier this year, Google announced that it plans to open a global fintech operations hub in Gift City. The place is already home to over 20 major international banks, including Barclays and HSBC.
And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world. Portuguese Prime Minister António Costa resigned on Tuesday, hours after prosecutors detained his chief of staff in a probe into alleged corruption in his government's handling of lithium mining and hydrogen projects. He announced his decision in a televised statement after meeting President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. More than 100,000 people have registered to use Hanoi's public bicycle sharing service, and around 135,000 rides have been made after 2 months. Hanoi launched the service with 1,000 bikes, including 500 electric ones, at 79 stations near tourist sites, as well as bus and metro stations. Crowds gathered in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday to bid farewell to the National Zoo's 3 giant pandas who are due to return to China. Several visitors to the zoo wiped away tears as they jostled for a final selfie with these pandas. The zoo's giant panda program began in 1972 when Chinese Premier Chow En-lai loaned 2 pandas to the U.S. Nintendo has announced a new film project based on the long-running franchise The Legend of Zelda and the Kyoto-based firm's latest push beyond its core gaming business. Nintendo scored a runaway success with its animated Super Mario Bros. Movie this year. The Zelda film will be produced by the Super Mario creator. Now, a Switzerland-designed implant has revolutionized the treatment of Parkinson's disease, offering hope to the millions of people suffering from this debilitating condition. The device is expected to be commercialized for use in other diseases by 2026.
A breakthrough in the treatment of Parkinson's disease has been achieved by a Swiss-designed implant. 63-year-old Marc Gauthier, who has been suffering from the degenerative neurological disease for a long time, was the first person to receive the implant, which dramatically improved his ability to walk.
2 years ago, almost to the day, I got a stimulator implanted by Jocelyn, and it changed my life. Because now, I am independent. As you can see, I can walk. I'm still struggling to talk, but that's something else. It changed my life. Because now I can leave my home, run errands, I even go on foot to exercise.
The neuroprosthetic, which consists of an electrode field and an electrical impulse generator, simulates his spinal cord to activate his leg muscle. The device has been found to reproduce the way Gauthier would naturally walk.
For the past 20 years, we have been developing technology for precise stimulation of the spinal cord with the objective to restore walking after paralysis due to spinal cord injury. And we thought we could leverage this technology and concept to improve gait deficits that are due to Parkinson's disease.
Global estimates showed that more than 8.5 million people suffered from the disease in 2019. And the technology offers hope for the majority of advanced Parkinson's patients who suffer from mobility issues. The device is expected to be commercialized for use in other diseases by 2026.
Once I only need to be really on top.
That's all in this edition of DD India Global. Join us for another edition of the show at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from all of us here in New Delhi. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.